in the spring of 1962, on a cold Tuesday morning in late March in Lincoln County, Kansas, a 24-year-old farmer named Halver Eilers stood in the doorway of his father's machine shed and listened to his father tell him that the tractor was his now. The tractor was a green two-cylinder utility machine, 56 horsepower, the last model year of its line, built in 1958 and bought used by his father in 1960 for $2,400 from a dispersal sale in Mitchell County. The serial number was stamped on a brass plate riveted to the side of the dash. The hour meter read 3,140 hours. His father was 66 years old, and his hands were not as steady as they had been, and he was retiring to the small white house in town and turning the home place over to Halver. The home place was 320 acres of north-central Kansas, mixed wheat and milo, and a 40-head cow herd that grazed the limestone post pasture in the southwest quarter. Halver was lean, medium height, with a square jaw and steady gray eyes and large, rough hands. He had grown into during the high school years. He had spent working the home place every Saturday and every summer. He had a plain, dark canvas work cap, a denim work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, canvas work pants, and leather work boots his father had given him when he turned 16. That morning, his father walked him through the tractor one more time. He showed him how to set the timing on the magneto. He showed him where to grease and how often. He showed him where the maintenance log was, a small black hardback ledger book with a cloth spine, kept on a shelf in the shop above the workbench. The log went back to 1960 and was full of his father's pencil entries. Halver's father had said one thing to him that morning while his hand rested on the brass cereal plate. He had said, "A tractor you can fix is a tractor you can keep." He had said it once and had not said it again. Then he had handed Halver a leather satchel of his own wrenches, gone into the house, packed 2 suitcases, and let his wife drive him into town to the small white house on Elm Street. Halver was the operator of the 1958 two-cylinder for 34 years. 3 miles east of the Eilers place, on a county road that ran past a church and a one-room schoolhouse and a creek bottom of cottonwoods, lived a man named Wilmer Knipfel. Wilmer was 24 also in 1962, and he had inherited his own father's place, 400 acres of similar mixed ground, 18 months earlier, when his father had died of a heart attack at 58. Wilmer was heavy-set, broad-shouldered, with a wide-open face and a thick brown mustache that had come in early, and an easy, ready laugh that made him popular at the co-op counter. He was running an old 1948 model that had come with the place, and he had decided in the late winter of 1962 that he was not going to run an old tractor the way Halver Eilers was about to run an old tractor. In the spring of 1968, 6 years after Halver took over from his father, Wilmer drove down to the implement dealership in the town of Lincoln, the Lincoln County seat, and traded the 1948 model in on a brand-new green wide-front utility tractor. The new model was $9,500. The dealership was Tarrasch Implement, run by a man named Glenn Tarrasch, who was about 10 years older than Wilmer and had been selling tractors in Lincoln since 1955. Glenn had financed the trade-in deal at 7.5% over 5 years. Wilmer's annual payment was $1,850. He felt good about it. He drove the new tractor home down the gravel road and pulled into Halver's drive on the way past, just to show him. Halver was in the south wheat field on the 1958 two-cylinder, pulling a chisel plow, when Wilmer rolled up to the field road and waved him over. Halver stopped the tractor. Wilmer stood in the open door of the cab of his new wide front and called across the fence. He said, "Halver, you have to come look at this." Halver climbed down off the 1958 and walked over. Wilmer was beaming. He said, "This is the future." He said, "You are going to be the only man on this section running an old two-cylinder in 5 years." He said, "Come down to Tarrasch and see what they have." Halver stood by the fence with one hand on the top wire and looked at the new wide front. He said, "That is a fine machine, Wilmer. I hope it does what they said it would." He climbed back up onto the 1958 and went back to plowing. Wilmer drove off shaking his head and laughing in the cab of his new tractor. That was the first of 4 times Wilmer Knipfel was going to roll past Halver Eilers' place with a brand-new tractor across the next 30 years. The second time was in the spring of 1976. The third was in the late summer of 1983. The fourth was in the spring of 1992. Each time, Halver was on the same 1958 two-cylinder, doing the same kind of work, in the same fields. Each time, Wilmer's new tractor was a different model and a higher horsepower and a higher financed price. Each time, the gap between the two of them, measured in dollars, was wider than it had been before. The gap was always going to widen year after year in favor of Wilmer Knipfel. That was the whole point of buying a new tractor every 8 years. That was what Wilmer had decided to do in 1962, and that was what he had done. Subscribe to The Honest Farmer and tell me in the comments about the man on your section who has been running the same tractor since you were a boy and is still running it. Those are the men I want to hear about. In 1976, Wilmer traded the 1968 model in on a new 126-horsepower model at $22,000, financed at 9% over 6 years, with an annual payment of $4,300. He pulled into Halver's drive again on a Saturday afternoon in May with the new tractor on a flatbed trailer, and Halver came out of the shop where he was rebuilding the 1958's carburetor on the workbench. The carburetor was laid out in pieces on a clean white shop towel. The float, the needle, the jets, the gaskets. And Halver was holding a small brass jet in his fingers when Wilmer walked into the shed. Wilmer looked at the carburetor parts and laughed. He said, "Halver, you are still running that thing." He said, "I just bought a tractor that does not have a carburetor." He said, "This one is fuel injected." He said, "You are not going to be able to keep up with this kind of work in 5 years. He said, "Come down to Tarrasch with me next week, and Glenn will show you the demo model." Halver had set the brass jet down on the shop towel. He had said, "That is a fine machine, Wilmer. I hope it does what Glenn said it would." He had said nothing else. Wilmer had driven off again. The carburetor on the 1958 had been reinstalled by supper time that day. The job had cost Halver $22 in parts, and the float kit had come from a rebuilt tractor parts catalog he kept in a drawer. In the late summer of 1983, Wilmer traded the 1976 model in on a new 155-horsepower model at $48,000, financed at 16% over 8 years, with an annual payment of $9,400. The 1983 trade-in came at the worst possible time. The federal funds rate had spiked the previous year, the corn price had collapsed, and Tarrasch Implement was barely keeping the doors open. Glenn Tarrasch had been at the desk for the deal that summer afternoon, and Glenn had given Wilmer the trade-in number that worked for Wilmer and the financing rate that the manufacturer's credit arm was offering. But Glenn had also said one thing to Wilmer at the end of the deal that he did not normally say. He had said, "Wilmer, you sure about this?" Wilmer had said yes. He had not slept on it. He had driven the new tractor home that evening. He pulled into Halver's drive on the way past, the way he always did. Halver was on the porch with a cup of coffee in his hand. Wilmer rolled the cab window down and called across the gravel. He said, "Halver, the third one," he said, "I am going to be on a 155-horse new green tractor, and you are still going to be on the 1958. He said, "When are you going to give it up?" He had said it more loudly than he had intended, because he was a little bit nervous about the deal he had just signed. Halver had set his coffee cup down on the porch railing. He had said, "Wilmer, the 1958 is doing fine. The hour meter reads 6,800. He said, "I have done 2 valve jobs and 3 carburetor rebuilds, and I changed the magneto last spring." He said, "Total parts cost on this tractor across 21 years of ownership is about $3,800. He had said, "I am not giving it up. I am running it." He had picked his coffee cup back up. Wilmer had driven off again. The almost quit moment for Halver came at the kitchen table on a Thursday night in October of 1984. The 1983 corn harvest had come in low because the spring had been too wet, and the operating loan for the 1984 crop year was tighter than Halver liked. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a small wooden lap desk in front of him and the black hardback ledger open on it. The ledger was the same one his father had handed him in 1962, with 22 more years of pencil entries added to it now. Every part, every hour, every gallon of fuel, every grease cycle. The page he was reading that night was the page where he had recorded the cost of the 1983 valve job, $146 in parts, his own labor, 3 Saturdays in the shop. His wife Hazel had gone to bed. The kitchen was quiet. The radio was playing low. He had thought that night about driving down to Tarrasch Implement on Saturday morning and looking at the demo model of the new green tractor that Wilmer had bought, not because the 1958 was failing him. The 1958 was running fine, but because he was 46 years old that fall, and the work was harder than it had been when he was 24, and his wife had been quietly suggesting for the last 2 years that maybe a tractor with a heated cab and an automatic transmission would let him farm into his 60s without breaking his back. The new tractor would have been $45,000 on a trade. He had the credit at the bank to do it. He had thought about it for 45 minutes that night. Then he had gone out to the shed in the cold to feed the wood stove and to check on a heifer that was due to calve, and on the way back into the house he had stopped at the shed door and had looked at the inside of the door where his father had pinned a piece of paper in 1962. The piece of paper was a handwritten note from his father to him. The note had said, "A tractor you can fix is a tractor you can keep." The note had been there for 22 years, in his father's hand. The pencil was faded. The paper was yellow, but the sentence was still legible. Halver had stood there for a moment in the cold and had felt right about it. He had not felt good about it, because he was tired and his back hurt, and his wife was right that a heated cab would be easier on him. But right and good are different things, and Halver Eilers knew the difference, the way Ernest Fretch down in Oklahoma knew it, and the way Wendell Shower up in North Dakota knew it. Different states, same generation, same lesson, taught the same way. He had gone back into the kitchen and closed the ledger and put the lap desk away and gone to bed. He had not driven down to Tarrasch the next Saturday. The 1958 ran the 1985 crop year and the 1986 crop year and every crop year after that. The third trade, Wilmer's 1983 purchase, caused him real trouble. The note payments were $9,400 a year. By the spring of 1986, his operating loan was extended against a soft 1985 corn check. By 1987, he had sold 60 acres of his own ground to Mitchell Lehman, a younger neighbor, at the 1987 price of $840 an acre, $50,400 total, of which $38,000 went to clear the operating loan and pay down the back end of the tractor note. The bank had restructured the rest. Wilmer farmed 340 acres after that, down from his peak of 420 in 1976. He never got the 60 back. Mitchell Lehman's son, who is now running it, planted it to a wheat-soybean rotation in the 1990s and sold it for $3,800 an acre to a Kansas City investor in 2001. The fourth trade was the spring of 1992. Wilmer was 54, the corn was starting to come back, and he traded the 1983 Model in on a new 170-horse machine at $78,000 financed at 8.5 over 7 years. By 1992, Glenn Tarrasch had retired, and the dealership was being run by Glenn's son, Tony, who was 28 years old and had been on the sales floor for 3 years. Tony had not given Wilmer the kind of soft warning his father had given Wilmer in 1983. Tony had not said, "Wilmer, you sure about this?" Tony had simply done the deal. Wilmer's annual payment on the new note was $13,400. He pulled into Halver's drive on the way past, the way he always did. Halver was on the seat of the 1958 in the south wheat field, plowing in green stubble. He was 54 years old himself by then. Wilmer rolled the window down. He said, "Halver, the fourth one." He said, "This one is the last." He said, "I am 64. I am going to retire on this tractor." He said, "When are you going to give up that 1958? Halver had stopped the tractor and had climbed down. He had walked over to the fence. He had said, "Wilmer, the 1958 is fine." He had said, "I will be on it the year you retire, and I will be on it the year you sell." Wilmer had laughed. Halver had not laughed. They had parted there at the fence. The 1958 ran the 1992 crop year. It ran the 1993 crop year, including the 1993 flood that closed out half the corn ground in eastern Kansas. Halver's place was high enough on the rolling Lincoln County limestone that he did not lose his crop, and the 1958 pulled the chisel plow through the wet stubble in November of 1993 the way it had in November of 1972. The hour meter on the 1958 read 11,460 hours by the end of 1993. Halver had done 4 valve jobs across the years, 6 carburetor rebuilds, 2 complete magneto replacements, 3 sets of rings, 2 crankshaft seals, 1 rebuild of the hydraulic pump, and a few dozen smaller fixes. Total parts cost across 31 years of ownership, written carefully in the black hardback ledger by year, was just under $14,000, about $450 a year. The fuel, the 1958, was a gasoline model, not the diesel option that had also been available that year, averaged about $900 a year across those years. Total operating cost on the 1958 across 31 years of running, including parts and fuel and oil and grease and the one new battery he installed in 1981, was just over $41,000. The original 1960 purchase price his father had paid was $2,400. So 31 years of operation on a tractor that originally cost $2,400 had run a total cost, purchase, parts, fuel, everything, of approximately $43,000, about $1,400 per year of running. To put that another way, the cost of running the 1958 came to about $1.50 an hour of operation across the 11,400 recorded hours. Call it $11,800 at the end of 1995, the last full crop year, $1.50 an hour. The dealership in Lincoln charged $68 an hour for shop labor in 1995 and would not have been able to do anything to that tractor for less than $400 on the smallest visit because of the diagnostic fee on a machine they would have called obsolete. So Halver's hourly cost on his own machine was less than what the dealership charged for 1 minute of a mechanic's time. That is what shop knowledge is worth. That is what the sentence his father had said to him in 1962 had been worth in dollars and cents across 34 years. Across the same 31 years, Wilmer Knipfel had paid the principal and interest on 4 tractor notes, 1968, 1976, 1983, and 1992, for a total of approximately $197,000 in note payments, net of trade-in credits applied at each transaction, plus operating costs, fuel, parts, and the diesel engine repair work he had paid the dealership to do because he had not been taught to do it himself. His total tractor cost across 31 years was somewhere in the neighborhood of $240,000, about $7,700 a year, 5.5 times what Halver had spent, plus the 60 acres he had sold in 1987 to clear the 1983 note. 60 acres of north-central Kansas wheat ground, valued in 2001 at $3,800 an acre. Gone. In the spring of 1995, Wilmer was 67 and was thinking about selling the operation to a younger neighbor. He had stopped trading tractors. The 1992 model was going to be his last. He came over to Halver's place one evening in May, when the wheat was up and the spring work was nearly done. He was driving the 1992 tractor down the road from a field he had been working, and instead of driving past Halver's drive, he turned in. Halver was on the porch with a cup of coffee. Wilmer climbed down out of the cab and walked up to the porch. He had a little limp now from a hip he had been favoring for 2 years. He sat down on the top porch step. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Halver, I want to tell you something." He said, "I have been driving past your place since 1968. He said, "Every time I passed, I had a brand new tractor, and you had the 1958. He said, "I have been thinking about that for 27 years now. He said, "I thought I was getting ahead of you." He said, "I was not." Halver had not said anything for a while. Then he had said, "Wilmer, you were not foolish. The new tractor in 1968 had advantages over the 1958. Speed, comfort, wider rows. The new tractor in 1976 had more advantages, hydraulic improvements, better hitch." He said each new tractor was a real machine, doing real work, and the math worked at the corn prices and the rates that were true the year you signed the note. He said nobody knew the Fed was going to take rates to 20% in 1980. Nobody knew the corn price was going to do what it did in 1982. He said the difference between us was not that you were foolish to trade. The difference was that I had been taught one sentence by my father, and you had not been taught the same sentence by yours. He said, "My father told me, a tractor you can fix is a tractor you can keep." He said, "Your father did not say that to you because your father bought new every 12 years too, and that was the way of it on your place." He said, "That is the only difference, the bookkeeping, the sentence." Wilmer had nodded slowly. He had said, "My father bought a new green tractor in 1957 and traded it in 1968, the year before he died." He said, "I was 23. I had taken the deed, and I had taken the herd, and I had taken the new wide front trade-in plan from Glen Tarrasch the spring after my father's funeral." He said, "I never thought to do anything else." Halver had said, "I know." He said, "That is what I am telling you. The sentence travels from one generation to the next, or it does not. And a man does what his father did." He said, "My father did the unusual thing in 1960 of buying a 2-year-old used tractor when the new ones were available. He bought it because he could not afford the new one and because he believed he could keep it running. He kept it running for 2 years and then handed it to me. I have kept it running for 33 more. The sentence has held." Wilmer had stood up after a moment. He said, "Halver, I am sorry I laughed at you in 1968 and 1976 and 1983 and 1992. Halver had said, "It is forgotten." Wilmer had walked back to his tractor and had driven home. The 1958 ran the 1995 crop year. It ran the spring of 1996. In late June of 1996, with 11,842 hours on the meter, Halver Eilers parked the 1958 in the back of the shed and covered it with a tarp. He was 58. His son Linus was 33 and running the home place full-time now with a 1971 model that he had bought used in 1989 for $5,800 from a sale in Cloud County. Linus had been calibrating his own tractor for 7 years. Linus had the same hardback ledger book on the same shelf in the same shop. The maintenance entries beginning in 1989 were in Linus's hand, under Halver's hand, under Halver's father's hand. 3 generations of pencil entries on the same ledger book, on the same shop shelf, in the same family. The 1958 is still in the back of Halver's shed in the fall of 1996. The tarp is on it. The hour meter still reads 11,842. The carburetor is still rebuilt from the spring of 1995. The magneto is still timed correctly. The valves are still adjusted. If a man pulled the tarp off and changed the oil and put fresh gas in the tank and pulled the starter, the 1958 would start within 3 pulls and would run as it had run for 38 years. It is going to be there in 2010, and it is going to be there in 2025 if Linus keeps his hand on it the way Halver kept his hand on it. Wilmer Knipfel sold his operation to a younger neighbor in 1997, including the 1992 tractor at a depreciated value of about $32,000. He moved to a smaller place in town. He ran into Halver at the co-op in the fall of that year, and they shook hands. He looked back at the 1992 tractor only once, when the new owner drove it past on the highway one Sunday afternoon, and after that he did not look at it again. He has the 4 trade-in receipts in a folder in his desk in town. The folder is labeled in his own hand. Tractors I bought, 1962 to 1992. Underneath the 4 receipts is a single piece of paper on which he has written sometime around 1995 the sentence Halver had said to him on the porch. The sentence reads, "A tractor you can fix is a tractor you can keep." The folder is closed. Wilmer does not open it often. The salesman was pricing what a new tractor could do new. Halver was pricing what an old tractor could do maintained. Those are 2 different things. A tractor you can fix is a tractor you can keep. A tractor you traded in is a tractor someone else is going to fix and someone else is going to keep, and you are going to be paying for the next one. The 1958 stayed. The trades did not. Always put the money in the thing that stays. Subscribe to The Honest Farmer. Hit the bell. The next story is about a man in Iowa who built a grain bin in 1973 with $1,800 in sheet steel and bolts, and his neighbor who put up the same size bin in 1980 for $19,000 on a note, and what happened to both bins in the 1993 flood. It is the same story, told with different equipment. It is always the same story.